In this week's episode, I'm sitting down with Pastor Ryan Fogelsong to get an inside look at what goes on behind the scenes of a Sunday morning worship service. I'm your host, Aaron Miller, pastor of equipping at Grace Baptist Church in Santa Clarita, California. Welcome to Magnify.
I would be curious to know if there's a way to put up some more baffling in front of the window, and if that would deaden it.
Why do we have a window?
So the goal would be that you wouldn't set up a band in here. The band would set up in the choir room.
Doesn't the sound bounce around all over the place in there?
No, because you tight mic everything. You'd have amplifiers in a different room, so it's actually not bouncing around in there.
Oh.
So you'd have a drum kit, but I've been in recording sessions where the drum kit is live, but the bass player is just hearing the tone in his ears.
So would the feed be in here?
The feed would be in here.
Oh.
So that would be the goal. And then the engineer and the producer could see into there. And it's always best to get a band together in the same room because it's more than just what they're playing. They're reacting and they're responding and they're listening to one another.
And they would hear themselves through the ears.
Yeah. Because you make choices based on, body language, energy in the room. So it's always good to be in proximity with one another.
Thanks for sitting down with me today, man.
You bet.
I was thinking through how to have this conversation. And usually when I'm sitting down with a guest, I'm trying to think on behalf of people who are listening. And then I realize, no, I actually myself am very curious about things pertaining to what you do in this church. Because most of what you do could be described as show, don't tell.
Sure.
There's a lot going on behind the scenes. You're in a position that many churches, they don't even make pastoral.
Sure.
It could be a director, maybe depending on the size of the church, it's just kind of a volunteer situation. But we've made it pastoral for lots of reasons I'd like to make obvious and surface on this podcast.
Yeah.
First things first, how long have you been a pastor?
Been a pastor for coming on 3 years.
Yes. How long have you been in ministry, though?
10 years here at
Yeah,
Grace.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you have grown up here in many ways, right? We've talked about that on previous podcasts, but you've had exposure to ministries not only here locally, but also around the country. Mm-hmm. We talk a little bit about those partnerships and the things that God has allowed you to do. Yeah,
I grew up here, moved out to Santa Clarita in the late 90s, a couple doors down from the Beckwiths. This is the church I got saved in. I met my wife here when she was in high school. I was in my first year of college. Got baptized here by Mike Gaston. So this is the interesting thing. I wasn't baptized until I was engaged.
That's right.
I made my faith my own as a junior in high school. But then I got baptized when I was 23.
It's kind of similar to your brother, too, who Mike Gaston also baptized.
Yes.
Right before he went with Stephanie to work at Crew.
Right. And I try to deconstruct that, going, why didn't I get baptized early? And I just think I was
disobedient. That's fine.
I was so much of an introvert. The idea of getting up in front of people was so intimidating. But it's helpful for people in the room, I think. I love when we have adult baptisms because here's a person stepping out in obedience. And people can identify going like, I have waited a long time too. Mm-hmm. I'm an introvert. I haven't stepped out, but here's somebody who's done it. I think I can be courageous enough to do that as well.
But you've had ministry experience starting in college is actually, right?
No, you're right. I was part of the chapel band at Masters. We got the opportunity to play at Hume Lake one summer of 2007. So just recently graduated. We got asked by Darren McWaters to come out and be the band. And we were just the chapel band at that time, and we're like, chapel band is such a lame name. We got to come up with a name for the group. And I don't know how we did it, but Chasing Cadence ended up becoming that band name. And for the next 10 to 15 years, even into our 30s, we're still getting called by those churches that attended that one summer camp to come and lead their youth. And the joke was like, we're going to be in our 50s still doing these youth events.
A little sidebar question. I'm just curious, how do you think bands best come about names? Is it just like you're throwing spaghetti against the wall, see what sticks? Like what?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you try to find like a secret meaning or something that like is an Easter egg for fans, but
cadence is like rhythm. It's like the pros.
The idea of
rhythm.
chasing that like a cadence is that regular rhythm of life, and we're always chasing after consistency in the Christian life.
Did y'all take a vote? Do you remember?
I don't remember. The band leader at that point was again Patrick Carmichael, who's now a pastor at a church in the Valley, and
that's right.
So we just kind of followed him and That was it.
There's occasionally where you'll hear something. It could be on a commercial.
Yeah.
It could be anywhere. You see it and you're like, oh, that's a great band name.
I know. But then, like, you think about band names like Green Day or Led Zeppelin, and separated from the actual sound, you go like, that is a lame name. Green Day.
Led Zeppelin. Like,
Right.
It's not even L-E-A-D.
Right. But it just coalesces with whatever the style is, and it just becomes the identity.
Smashing Pumpkins.
It's so funny.
Okay.
Nickelback.
Oh, good grief.
So from Chasing Cadence on, I got the opportunity to play with a band called Enfield at the time. We were
Right.
part of the conference called Resolved. We heard it this morning from one of our pastors, but the idea of Resolve came from Jonathan Edwards and his resolutions as a young man.
Enfield was where he was doing ministry, correct?
Right, Enfield,
Yeah.
Connecticut. It's where he preached sinners in the hands of an angry God.
Right.
So we became the band for that conference, the band for the college group then, and we had also the opportunity to record records. So that was part of my job, is to coordinate production every year for that record and then the release for the Resolve conference. So that's where I think I cut my teeth in writing for the local church. Because in Chasing Cadence, we were writing what would be a great record, be exciting for kids, but Enfield was writing for the church.
In those days, did you see yourself moving towards pastoral ministry?
I didn't. No, I thought my trajectory was going to be, touring session bass player, still involved in ministry because I didn't want to be separated from the church, but I had high hopes of being a movie score arranger and orchestrator. I listened to a lot of movie scores back then, John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, Danny Elfman, all that. But the Lord changed my heart in those conversations. It really was after Enfield. Now it's 2013, 2014, and we have one child, Henry, and we're thinking about moving, and I'm having conversations here at Grace with David Hegg, with Peter, and with Ryan, and the Lord pulling my heart towards ministry in a vocational way.
Yeah.
And then it was several years later, he continued to pull on my heart to go, this is really a pastoral responsibility.
Yeah.
So
I know that there were other people in your ear as well. I mean, you've had other influences that are not local. I mean,
Sure.
Bob Coughlin, Rick Holland, I'm imagining God used them to kind of put that in your
they sure did.
headspace. Yeah.
Yeah, there were mentors in college. I had a bass teacher, Todd Johnson, who I eventually took over for. And he invested in me not only musically, but just in life and thinking about musical giftedness, maybe pointing towards a calling.
Yeah.
And then that got finessed and more focused by Bob, where I got to see it in real life. And it wasn't just in the way that he led, but in the way that he led was just so consistent with his home life and him being a good husband and being a good father.
You've mentioned the name Bob Coughlin many times, like in membership classes or in other venues. Just give the listeners a little intro to who Bob is and the influence that he's had on you. And
yeah. So Bob Coughlin is the pastor of Sovereign Grace Church of Louisville, Kentucky. He's written 2 books. He's working on a 3rd right now. His first book is probably his most well-known. It's a compilation of blog posts then organized into a book called Worship Matters. So you could go to his website, worshipmatters.com. Those are his blog posts, but then he organized it into this book. And it really is kind of the field notes for anybody involved in music ministry.
yeah,
From a philosophy of worship down to the practicalities of, okay, what does that mean for the 16-year-old guitar player?
And I don't feel like anyone was doing that. Like Worship Matters and just observing him from a distance.
Yeah.
He was kind of like the first music director or musician in a church that, for the first time for me, I was like, that's pastoral,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And he doesn't sway from, in his book, away from being confessional about, here's the things I messed up on.
Yeah.
He gives a great example of, we think we're doing the right thing, we have the best intentions, but we still mess up. We're still in process. And yet here are these biblical principles that we want to adhere to and have as our foundation as we're making decisions.
Yeah.
Are we always going to do it? No, not perfectly. And that's sort of the sovereign grace culture, to go, we're weak vessels, we're going to mess up, and we're going to embrace when we do, as an example for the believers.
How have you evolved in your pastoral perspective with what you do? Because, I mean, the first step was more as a musician, and as God was calling you and using influences in your life. I mean, maybe you were kind of like me. I feel like sometimes, Ryan, I stumbled into pastoral ministry.
Yeah, sure.
It started with like a mustard seed of a desire to preach. And I
Yes.
didn't even know what that meant.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, I'm like, some church was willing to give me money. And I'm like, holy cow, how did I get here?
Sure.
So look, I'm not trying to like transfer that story onto you.
Yeah.
But as you grew in your awareness of what it meant to be a pastor, How has that developed? People see you singing. They see you on the guitar, behind the piano.
Yeah.
What part of what you're doing is pastoral?
When I first came into ministry, in order to feel like I had to prove myself, because there's that self-conscious, like, I don't deserve to be here. So what am I going to put out in the world that would showcase I'm the right guy? And at that time, it was a musical skill, my creativity. I had orchestrated, I had written songs. And so if the product was just constructed well enough and then presented well enough, this would prove, this is my crying out into the world, I exist, right?
Yeah.
The more that I grew in ministry, it was less of the product, more about the people that you serve with.
Yes.
Because you can have the best product of the world, but music itself can't change people's hearts.
Yeah.
But because God has purchased us into a family, the one-on-one relationship, that's how we change. That's how we mature into Christ-likeness. And so it was watching people like Peter Beers, watching people like Bob Kauflin invest in people's lives. And then the musical stuff just kind of ebbs and flows and moves along. But it was that importance of establishing relationship and then feeding that relationship with the people that you're serving alongside.
And that's so much about ministry. Even those of us who preach, there's just that optic that people get for an hour and 15 a week.
Yeah.
And they may not understand the iceberg of activity that goes on throughout the week, even before and after a Sunday worship service.
Yes.
That involve people.
Yes.
People will wrongly think that someone who preaches, oh, that's what they do. They preach a 45 to 50-minute sermon, and what a great job. They get to go home and with you sit behind a piano where you conduct a choir, and it's like there's just so much more to it.
Yeah.
And I'm very thankful that it's a pastoral position because I see the fruit and the benefit of you engaging people, and it's not about the product.
Yep.
And sadly, that's not true in a lot of churches.
It's not.
It's about the product.
Right. That's what people see. That's what they hear. And that might be their only connection to whoever's leading that on a morning.
How do you field people's preferences in the area of music? That's probably the one area that people have a very quick, perhaps even knee-jerk response to with their preferences, style.
Sure. Yep.
How do you handle that?
It's always challenging, and each one's going to be unique and different. As best as I can, if I receive an email, it's going to be followed up by an invitation to coffee. Because I can articulate myself as best as I can in an email, but it can still be impersonal. And so I'm always going to take someone out to coffee and go, hey, you shared this one concern with me. Let's sit down and talk about what this is actually. The tough part about music and all types of art is the best type of music, Aaron, and it's the music that you like.
Right.
Right. And we often don't have control of what we think is best because it could be locked into a memory. Do you ever listen to a piece of music and you immediately get like a pit in your stomach or goosebumps because the first time you listened to that was at a particular important moment of your life?
Yeah.
Or you're driving along the highway and you see a landmark and it reminds you of a song because the first time you listened to that song, it was passing that one hill or highway.
Yeah.
So we have these emotional attachments, and it's the beauty of music. It has these properties that are almost like time machines in our mind.
It's sticky.
They're sticky.
It sticks to, you're right. It sticks to those moments and those memories that bring immediate recall.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just thinking through the power of that and then having a conversation to go, why do you think we should be doing these types of songs? Or why do you think we should not be doing these types of songs? And in those moments where we're having a conversation, that's where discipleship and shepherding happens.
And many times, what are people telling you?
I've heard we shouldn't do as many hymns. There's some great songs on Christian radio I think we should be doing.
And what are the reasons for that?
I think some of it would be a sense of new, a sense of novelty. Let's be thinking ahead, and these new songs are bubbling up and they're saying great things and we should be doing those. And I've sung this hymn for so long it's sort of lost the meaning just because I've done it over and over.
And I want to assume the best about people that have that approach.
Yeah.
Many times they're thinking, hey, we want this to appeal to people. We want this to be attractive.
Sure.
And they're not going to resonate with a hymn. They're not going to identify with that. And so let's try to identify with people and meet them where they are. I'm assuming that's the motivation.
Sure.
And so your response to that is what?
We have it commanded in the Psalms to sing a new song. We're not just to sing everything that we've sung before. We're supposed to be thinking of new ways to express the same truths. In some way, worship music is ancient future.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
We're always looking back. It's the same gospel. It never changes. And yet we're looking ahead to go, what are the expressions in Scripture that we can say in fresh, creative ways that impact our souls? I think a challenge becomes a lot of what's come up on the radio, they're great songs, but they weren't designed for corporate worship. They're designed to highlight the talent and the giftedness of the band, the producer, the vocalist. And sometimes it's taking that song going like, oh, I think we actually could do this in corporate worship. Other times it's going, the song in its construction, its composition is designed to highlight a vocal or to highlight an artist and their talent. We can't do it. There's this one song I really want to do, and it's by a great artist. It's a solid message. It's exciting to sing, but the melody range it's too high for me. It's too wide. So no one on a Sunday morning could come in and feel like they can engage in that song successfully.
So it's prohibitive for the corporate singing.
Right.
Yeah,
And I've tried to rearrange it in a couple different ways, and I can't quite get there.
But when you're product focused, it's about a performance.
Yes.
But we're congregational because we want to be obedient to Scripture.
Right.
And we want to sing, and we want people to experience that.
Right. I'd say that the theme verse of our ministry is Colossians 3:16. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God.
Well, is it then ever okay to have a special?
I think so. I think if there's a song that's not composed in a way for it to be congregational, and it sings something unique in a spot in the service, I think it can be encouraging.
And that's also kind of the mindset I imagine behind having concerts.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
Exposing truths in different ways and different respects.
Because there's all different types of art forms and genres when it comes to music, and some are going to be more helpful for the corporate participation. Other are going to be songs that just kind of wash over. It's like a corporate prayer or a pastoral prayer.
Yeah. So can the congregation sing this? That's in your head as you're thinking through a Sunday service.
Yes.
Hey everyone, Pastor Jared here. This past school year, the Grace Baptist family had the opportunity to bring food bags to the families at Golden Valley High School. We're so excited to continue partnering with them, as well as helping meet the needs within our own Grace family. We truly appreciate receiving ongoing donations to our food pantry. And for a list of items that are needed, you can visit gracebaptist.org/food pantry. Thank you for your generosity as we minister to our church family and those in the community.
What other things are you walking through as you think through putting together a service?
Yeah. I think I used to think more what songs are going to be helpful this morning and kind of group them together. But the more I think through a service and the more I talk with David and you guys, senior staff, is to go, what scripture readings, what prayer times, what's all going on in the service that can help feel like an idea, rather than, all right, I have 15 to 20 minutes. Here are the 3 songs I want to smush in there.
Yeah.
I have the benefit of having David's notes, 1 to 2 weeks in advance. So I get to look through that theme and think through, okay, how does this one song lead to the next song? How is there a natural progression for people?
How do you navigate from the text to song selection? Do you just have a copious knowledge of song selections? Is there a database? How does that work?
Sure. Well, one, practically, I do have a database. It's called the Planning Center. It's the way that we schedule volunteers, musicians. It's the way that we kind of put time to elements so we're able to approximately end on time.
Yeah.
It's where all of our songs are, the recordings, the sheet music, and all the different keys. And so as I'm going through his notes, I'm going, what is the theme? Is it the steadfast love of the Lord? Is it his covenant love that he wants to end on? So what's going to prepare people's hearts to receive that well as we remember the gospel, but with a particular theme of his steadfast love in the first?
So it's a software like you type in covenant love and like all these songs come up.
No, it's not.
Okay, I didn't know how that worked.
Yeah. Chat GPT. Look
Dude,
up.
I'm such a novice at this. People ask me, like, what's your favorite, hymn? And I'm like, I don't know the titles. But I start, humming it for them. I don't pay attention to certain details that I probably should.
And the interesting thing, we don't put up the titles on the screen.
That's probably why I don't know.
I know.
Yeah.
But what we started doing, and I'll get back to your original question, was we put up a slide right before the services and after the services that has the copyright information, which we legally have to put up.
Yeah.
and the titles. And we make those available on gracebaptist.org/order of service. So if people want to follow along during the services and see the names of the songs, or they just want to go back and see the archive of what are the services here at Grace, they can do that at their leisure.
Okay, so going back to the original question.
Sure.
You're putting together a service, and so you're thinking through the themes of the sermon?
The themes of the sermon. And I think you've been doing it long enough that there's just recall when it comes to mind. You know. And it might not be the entire theme of a song, but there's a line in a song that you want to draw people's attention to. Maybe it's at the heart of the song or the core of the song.
And so if we have a service on a Sunday, like when are you putting those songs together? Is it like not even within the same week, probably the week before?
Right. I try to be 2 weeks in advance.
Okay.
I'm putting up scripture readings. I'm putting up prayer times. You know, the service isn't a lock, but it's a pretty good idea of what we're going to do. And then we go into a Wednesday service planning meeting. And it's kind of, okay, here's what we're projecting in a week and a half. Does this look good? And sometimes it's like, actually, we need to make this announcement. Okay, and that's timely, so we got to bump a few things.
So you've selected songs. And then it's Wednesday at like what, 1 o'clock? Who's in that meeting, and how do you run that meeting?
Sure. So I chair it, and around the room we have Pastor Joe, executive pastor. We have media there. We have tech there. We have outreach there. We have our music team there.
Now, I understand why you have tech. I understand why you have musicians. I understand, I think, why you have Joe Keller, right?
Yeah.
What's outreach doing there?
We're trying to think through strategically each month having an outreach moment. And so Kim is there to inform us of things like the CHF boxes that we're doing. We're going to couple that with Poverty Encounter. Even as we're thinking about Christmas, here's our strategy going into our Bridge to Home initiative.
So these are all aspects that you're highlighting in the service.
That's correct.
Right. This is not just about song selection.
No. So in the same way, the first Sunday of every month, we take the Lord's Supper. The third Sunday, we try to be faithful to this. Sometimes it changes. We have baptisms. And then the fourth Sunday ends up being a stream, a story, or a resource.
So you're organizing all of that.
Yeah.
Right.
So we have an Excel spreadsheet of the whole year laid out. We're trying to get everybody on the same page.
Right.
Because if everyone knows what we're doing, then everyone has buy-in and an equal opportunity to kind of speak into.
And so in that meeting, are you just walking through that then next Sunday's order of service?
Right. So it would be, at that point, a lock. Here's what we're doing. Last check, everybody. Is there anything we need to alter?
Right.
Oh, there's this one last thing that we need to mention about men's conference. Great. We'll add that to the announcement.
That's a good point, because you're not just thinking through music. You're thinking communication. Right. You're thinking timing. Obviously, you have to work within a particular time frame. And you're always thinking outside the framework of just 1 week. You got to shore up this next coming Sunday for sure.
Yes.
Right. But you're also thinking the week after and perhaps a month later.
Yes.
You know, depending on the season. If it's Easter in 3 weeks, there's some things you got to nail down, I imagine.
Right. So once we debrief the previous Sunday, we forecast the next two, then we take a look at the month and maybe even a full season.
How long does that meeting last every week?
It's about an hour.
Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes it goes a little bit longer. I wanted to also mention, we have Kim and Sarah there also because we want to get a 360 approach to what that Sunday was like. So them being at the Engage Center is a very helpful way to get stories to go, you know, we met a lot of new folks and they, you know, this is where they're coming from. This was a story that I heard and go like, oh, let's follow up on that.
Yeah. So in that meeting, you review the previous Sunday as well.
That's right.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, which is always helpful.
And
humbling.
Yeah.
And I try to be first to lead the charge on, I wish I said this better, or I stumbled over my words.
Yeah.
Because we're imperfect.
And dude, we're just talking Sundays.
Yeah.
That's not even some of the special events. Sundays don't stop coming because we have these special events.
Right.
And so you and your team, you're juggling multiple things at a time. You're even thinking through, I know with Grace Kids and Summer Adventure.
Yes.
And the base camp. I mean, you're spinning all of those plates as well. It's quite busy.
It is. And there's times in that meeting where we'll bring in other people because there might be a concentration of that season of like, it's important that they're in this meeting because we're going to be promoting this. We want to make this memorable in people's minds.
Yeah.
And if you're preaching on a Sunday, you're in that meeting.
Admittedly, I'm not the best in those meetings, but yeah, I come in for the part that, you want me in there for, and then I take my leave. Okay, folks, a little disclosure. I'm not a meetings guy.
You?
Dude. It's kind of like a known thing about me around staff. Like, I don't understand half the things people are talking about. I don't know how you do your job. It's over my head half the time. Joe is an organizational guru. You're a musician, a program guru. And I'm like, I don't know how these guys do it. And I stopped paying attention.
The power of presence, Aaron.
You're methodical. You're going to think through every detail. I know that it's on every Sunday morning, you're up at 4 a.m., right? And you're thinking through every detail of a service.
I'm up pretty early.
You're up pretty early.
I'm a processor, and the nice thing is no one else has to suffer except for me.
Right. You overthink so that we don't have to. We appreciate that.
You know what? It's true. A lot of the time, I don't need to, but I like to pre-visualize everything, you know?
Sure.
And I think through, on a Sunday morning, not only anything musical or programmatic, but I think through, okay, who am I serving with again?
Yeah.
And going like, last time I talked to this person, there was this one challenge in their life. I want to ask about that.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure that I'm making connections. The temptation, you know, as we've received musicians and maybe they've come from a different church, is their identity was wrapped up in what they played.
Yes.
And to go, no, a person is more than that.
Right.
A talent on a instrument is not spiritual giftedness. It's someone being responsible in their craft, and they're going to be really useful. Mm-hmm. But I want to get to know them, and I want them to feel like they're a person, that they are a contributor to this church outside of their talent and giftedness on a Sunday.
Yeah. I mean, is that difficult to help people see that?
I don't think so, because once you give them a taste.
Sure. And well, I guess, how do you do that? If people have locked themselves into, I am a musician, that is what I do. Mm-hmm. How do you help assimilate beyond that one particular category? Because there's more to their life in Christ than just what they do on stage.
I think, thankfully, I haven't really had to encourage it too much, because people naturally join those one another in groups.
Yeah. Right.
So a lot of our musicians, they're involved on the Sunday morning that they're assigned, but they're also in an ABF or a grace group. And the frequency to which they play allows for space for that. It's not like I have a guitarist who plays every week.
Yeah.
And that's purposeful.
Yeah.
Because I want people to be involved beyond what they do on a Sunday morning.
There's also the history, though, that we have within that department, that ministry, that it becomes its own Christ-centered caring body. They're caring for one another. They're, Peter pastorally before you kind of help lay that as a foundation. Sure, it's easy to kind of build on that in many ways. You don't allow it to be stagnant within a music category only.
Correct.
Right.
And I should say, because those type of activities were already happening, that's the culture on which people are come and they're being initiated into. It's already there.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so it's me just standing on the shoulders of giants going, and this is the culture of Grace Baptist Church.
Yeah.
And welcome to it.
In what I do, it's like you don't know how profitable that is until you're meeting that moment. And for me, whether it be preaching or counseling or just helping exercise leadership in the church, I quickly became aware. I'm like, I'm walking on some stones laid down by Jeff Beckwith, or I'm walking on these stones. I'm sitting on the shoulders of David Hegg when it comes to thinking through a text or thinking through just ideas and leadership in general.
Yeah.
I'm connected with guys that are stronger than me in so many different ways. I mean, even guys that are more commensurate with my age and stage of life, like yourself or Jared Burkholder, right? Where the strengths and the weaknesses begin to cover one another. Yeah. Right? I mean, bro, I don't know how people do what we do outside of team.
I know.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
I know.
Goodness.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's the way that God has made us and also the culture that's here. But if we can be vulnerable about like where we're weak, you know where to cover each other.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's a beautiful thing, to not feel like you have to present a version of yourself that's not you at the end of the day.
I wanted to ask you this. Can you remember a moment and describe what was going on in your mind when something was just falling apart on stage?
Goodness. So we have doors from the backstage onto the worship center, one on either side. We were going to come out at the end to do a final song, and David's in the middle of his prayer. I go to open the door, and it's locked. And I'm like, it's locked. David, please keep praying. And I'm scrambling. I'm running around. Where did I put my keys? Thankfully, this was like a 3 to 4 minute prayer. Someone found the keys, threw it to me, and I unlocked it. And we got on stage, and it probably looked like I had run a marathon with everybody else. But it reminds me every Sunday, as soon as the musicians exit off the stage and we close that door, I always do a little check just to make sure from the inside that it's unlocked.
Yeah. I don't know if I speak for everyone else, but I kind of like those human moments.
Yeah.
I like it when they unexpectedly surface because all things are teaching moments in my mind.
I know.
And it's a reminder to people that this is human and this is not a performance. This is meant to be participative and
Yep.
we're going to be just fine.
Yep. I think those are helpful. And people will actually comment. They're like, I liked how it was more human this morning and there were a few mistakes. I'm like, you liked it.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Meanwhile, your heart rate is through the roof.
But it is helpful because as much as we try to be professional, we're not always going to get it right.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it could be a little bit more organic than it is.
Yeah. What sort of like heart preparation do you do? I know that I kind of have a routine when I preach, you know. That's a very private question, but generally, like, can you describe that for us?
Sure. It's approaching the text that we're going to do, reading through it, meditating on it, then receiving David's notes, and then going, okay, what is he trying to emphasize out of that? And then asking the Lord, want to be encouraging to the congregation. We want whatever's sung and said to reverberate throughout the week until they come back again on that Sunday. Give me wisdom to choose the right elements.
Yeah.
And I can do my best, but because I'm a big believer in team, you know, it's always inviting that, hey, am I seeing this right? Does this seem to work well?
And that process helps you think through the songs,
Yeah.
the theme of the sermon, and all the things that the text highlights, right?
Yeah.
How do you go about, what's the process by which you determine the style? Hey, this is going to be a choir Sunday or an orchestra Sunday, or there's going to be a group of singers on stage with me, or I'm going to be behind the piano. No, I'm going to be behind the guitar this week. Like, what goes into that?
Well, on the choir orchestra side, we give them a calendar like in June for the next season.
Okay.
So that they know when they're up. So that's determined. Sometimes there's some flexibility in there. Same thing with kids' choirs when they're in, because they're working towards something, and it's not something that you could throw together within a week.
Yeah.
On the band ensemble side, that's a little bit more organic. Sometimes it's just as practical as we ask musicians to block out the Sundays that they're unavailable every 2 months. So every 2 months I send out that block out calendar. And sometimes it's like, we just don't have this player, so I'm gonna play this, or this person is gonna play this, rather than like hire somebody and import, you know, from another church. I'm a big believer in using the people that we have, using the people in this church family. So if we don't have somebody, it's like we don't have them, and that's okay.
I like how congregationally minded you are. I've always loved that because it's who we are.
Yeah.
You're not trying to focus on a product or performance.
Yeah.
You want this to resonate with the Grace Baptist family. And you're going to get people with different styles and proclivities and skill sets. I mean, I know you hope they can play. You want them to be able to play the instrument.
Right.
But you care more about the heart. And I've heard you verbalize that. I've heard Peter talk about that, you know.
Well, and I'll assign people based on whoever is playing around them to maybe strengthen their skill.
Yeah.
So if there's someone who's still growing and I want them to grow in this area, I'm going to pair them with somebody who they're going to have to rise to the occasion to play alongside. You've established that they're plugged into the church, they're here for the right reasons, and now this is a way to help them upgrade their skill.
Yeah. No, I just love that.
In terms of style, and I don't always get this right because I'm thinking about text, I'm thinking through what the song is saying, and we'll get through a debrief and someone will say, it sounded like the same song for all three songs. And I go, oh, it did, you know? And it could be all the songs were in the same key, all the songs kind of had the same tempo. And so I think there is a help in having variation and flow throughout, and sort of dynamic change throughout the songs that you do. Some song can be a little bit quicker, another's in a 6/8 rolling tempo, and then a 3/4, 4/4, just so there's contrast and it doesn't feel like we're just doing the same thing.
You as a pastor, but also as a musician, you enjoy writing?
I do.
Is that sometimes just music? Is it both music and lyric? What's the muse there? How often do you try to engage that activity?
Sure. I think for me, a driver is always what is the project that we're going to be doing in the future, and then me working towards that project. So I'm a writer for Sovereign Grace Music.
Okay.
And so every January, we have a writer's retreat for the next album. And so the next album that we're going to be working on for the next 2 years is Songs for the Lord's Day. So thinking through the different elements of the service, writing songs for baptism, for communion, for Lord's Supper, calls to worship, benediction, those types of things. And so if that's the target, then that's the inspiration to start writing more and more for that.
And what are you immersing yourself in? I imagine the scriptures, but other resources?
Yeah. A big resource to me has been, I think it's called Our Own Hymn Book, and it's the Spurgeon Hymnal. And the fascinating thing about the Spurgeon Hymnal, it's got no music in it. It has the text with the meter of the syllables.
Okay.
Because it was understood that that could apply to several different tunes. So they would get up and say, turn to hymn number 398, and we're going to sing this to the tune of Amazing Grace. But because the syllables were the same, people could hop into a text they've never sung before, but because they know the tune, that would just lock in perfectly.
Oh.
And so those meters are short meter, common meter, long meter. Sometimes you'll see in a hymnal like 7.8.8.8, and that's 7 syllables, 8 syllables, 8 syllables, 8 syllables. And those lock into tunes that were already in kind of the people's culture, the church culture.
So what's your process? Do you start with music first?
I often start with lyrics first.
Lyrics first. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, my phone on the notes section are full of lyrics that don't have tunes to them. And so that's the other side where I'll be inspired by something David will say or inspired by something I'm reading, go, oh, what a great first line for a song for my own enjoyment.
Right.
I'll write a text and maybe I'll set music to it.
Yeah.
But maybe not, and it's still good for my soul because
Sure.
I got to work out something.
And so how often have like Jared Burkholder or myself influenced this muse within you? Near constantly? No, I thought
Yeah.
so. I'm in awe of that ability. Even the finished product, like you've done a lot of our benedictions. I don't know how much of the sermon series you're aware of.
Yeah.
You know, I'm on the preaching team, so I kind of understand a lot of the outline. I don't know when you get that.
Yeah.
But I've loved, what's the last benediction you wrote for our series?
Oh, it was for 1 Corinthians, Jesus being all of life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working on one right now for Matthew. I'm thinking through this strategically. I'd like to do a full song. It would be fun to record live and have everybody sing.
Okay, so let's take Matthew. So then are you looking at commentaries? What are you doing? Like, what's the... This is very private, I understand.
Sure, David's
I'm
been
curious.
emphasizing the idea of the king and the kingdom.
Right.
And so that's been a helpful structure for me. You want me to read the text that I'm working with?
Sure, if you're willing to share.
Sure.
All right.
Verse 1, there's a kingdom without end, a realm of righteousness, slowly being revealed from age to age, already and not yet. There's a king whose law is love, and Jesus is his name. He who died for sinners rose victorious, lives ever to reign. The chorus is, praise our God Almighty, fall before his glory, come behold him, our King forevermore. Verse 3, there's a people set apart, empowered by his grace, and we live to worship our Redeemer, following in his ways. Verse 4, there's a raging war within, between our flesh and soul, but the Spirit arms us for the battle so we may be bold. And then the final verses, there's a day that's sure to come when earth will be restored. Jesus Christ will claim his sovereign right to reign forevermore. So each verse is establishing there's a kingdom, there's a king, there's a people, there's a war, then there's a day that's sure to come. So thinking through kind of all eternity, what's happened before, there's a king and a kingdom from eternity past. There's a people and a raging war, sanctification. Yeah. And then there's a day that we're going to be glorified and we'll reign with him forever.
Ryan, thanks for sharing that, man.
Sure.
Well, dude, I think it's great to leave it right there. It's a great way to end the podcast. Thanks so much for sitting down with us.
You bet.
Appreciate you. I love you. I love doing ministry with you. Folks, thanks so much for streaming in. Join us next time as we sit down with another guest. Thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure to subscribe to Magnify Podcast so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others. Post about it on social media or leave a rating and review. We would love to hear from you, so if you have any questions you'd like to ask in our mailbag, you can email them to magnify@gracebaptist.org, and we will answer them on the show. Thank you so much for streaming.